Hi, I'm Corey Kareen. Welcome back to The Intersect. This week I talked to Udbhav Tiwari, a new strategy executive at Signal. He's thinking about global privacy, strategy, and what it means to build with integrity in this AI-powered, surveillance-heavy world. But we started with a simple question. Is my group chat safe? Should I move it? This is something a lot of us are wondering about. And most of the tools we use today, iMessage, WhatsApp, they are technically encrypted end to end. But Udbhav breaks down why that's not the full story. Encryption doesn't actually equal privacy when the platform's still collecting data at every turn. Signal's a bit different. It's structured as a nonprofit. There are no ads. There's no data selling, no engagement maximizing algorithms. It's been designed from the ground up not to collect your data. And there are really two camps forming in tech. Platforms that monetize your data as a core business model, and then platforms that intentionally avoid collecting it, like Signal. This conversation is really about freedom, safety, and digital citizenship at a high level. Udbhav and I talk about how AI is reshaping communication and what it means to build platforms that protect people rather than exploit them, which he sees as possible. And stick around to the end of the conversation, where Udbhav shares how he actually uses AI in his own life. And I leave you with some of the most interesting stories in AI that I've been following. Let's get into it. Udbhav Tiwari, welcome to The Intersect. We're going to talk all about Signal and what Signal is. Give us a bit of 101. What is Signal and how big is it? How long has it been around? How many people are using it? You're in Berlin. This is obviously a global product, or maybe not. So tell us about Signal.
Signal is effectively the world's most widely used, truly secure private messaging app. And is also the creator of the Signal protocol, which is a technology standard via which end-to-end encrypted communications can take place. End-to-end encryption is actually, when it comes to messaging today, very quickly becoming the norm rather than the exception. If you use WhatsApp, you're using end-to-end encryption. If you use iMessage, you're using end-to-end encryption. But the reality is the reason all of those users are turning to Signal is because just end-to-end encryption is no longer enough. It's the metadata that is collected about that information that actually makes that information quite powerful. But Signal is unique in that we barely collect any metadata about the conversations.
You're saying in other messaging protocols that metadata, i.e. pieces of private information about oneself, could be exposed in some way. Or am I thinking about this the right way?
That sounds absolutely right. Just as a way to illustrate this as an example, when you send a message over WhatsApp, WhatsApp still needs to know which phone number to deliver the message to. So while I may protect that hello that I've said from WhatsApp, so WhatsApp can't see what I've sent you, they still actually need to know where to send it, who to send it to, is that person connected to the internet, is their device able to receive that message? All of these things are a part of why metadata is collected by various messaging applications. But what Signal does, and that's why we have done many technical innovations, is we also manage to encrypt a lot of this metadata where we don't expose this information to the service.
What about my group chat? Because it is very important to me. It is, I start the day, I end the day. It's like shout out to everybody's group chat. Do we need to get on Signal? Do we need to re-platform? Because this is how we communicate now. We just text and media each other all day long.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely think that group chat to move to Signal. And I hope over the course of this conversation, I've even given folks some reasons as to why it can protect that conversation in ways that like other, applications can't. But the reality is that the dicey part about communication platforms is that they're all based on network effects. The reason many people make group chats on iMessage or group chat on WhatsApp over group chats on Signal is the odds are if you search a number between one of those two platforms and maybe you can add Google Messages too, you will probably find the vast majority of the people on a messaging platform between one of these three platforms. And if I had to make a chat with my mother on Signal as an example, I have to install the application on her phone, tell her, this is the application that you can use to chat with me. And she'll be like, okay, cool. There are actually many groups of 30, 40, hundreds of people sometime who are collectively going, we don't want this risk of our metadata being used to go against us. So if I'm an organization that hypothetically is planning a protest somewhere in the world, it actually is worthwhile for all 30 of us to install this application, because otherwise we might go to prison. Right. And like, so the reality of like convincing your friends to install a new applications to discuss breakfast and convincing someone to install an application if you may go to prison are very, very different.
Because we're going way fast on this and we're just getting right into it. I mean, this is so interesting. But we should rewind a little. You've been at Signal only since the first half of the year, so sometime in the spring. What is your official title?
Yeah, my title is the Vice President of Strategy and Global Affairs.
So tell us, as the Vice President of Strategy and Global Affairs, what do you do at Signal?
My job is essentially to make sure that when Signal shows up in the world, the relationship that it builds both with its community, so its users and governments, but also the organizations that can control how Signal exists in the world, whether it's civil society that expects us to deploy privacy in a big way, whether it's our industry peer, so that we can work together to make sure that end-to-end encryption is protected around the world.
I mean, seems like kind of a big job. You've got a lot to think about. I really do want to understand what your roadmap is when you think about AI. And I mean, we're talking to ChatGPT every morning while we're like brushing our teeth, and we're just giving over all of this data yet again to private companies. And AI is just accelerating this. And it's incredible for a lot of reasons. But, the best episodes on our show so far have been about privacy, because it's a signal that says people are really, they want to understand what they should be doing. But at the same time, we're experimenting, we're trying to build in this new reality. How is Signal thinking about AI, and how do you sort of control for other environments where your app shows up? I mean, right now it's like a cute little, I have like the tie-dye background on my phone. Okay, it's a pink little tie-dye Signal app. It's an app, but what is that going to be in a couple of years when we've got these avatars?
I think that's a really important question, because Signal as an organization has, over, I would say, the last couple of years, really started engaging with not just the promises that we make to our users of what the application can do with you, but also engaging with the operating systems on which our application runs. Let's just say that 2 years from now, you'll be able to open your phone or your laptop and say, get in touch with Corey and tell her I will be in New York next month, and try to find a good time for a coffee in the third week of August. And that's the prompt I just give the AI. And the AI's job in that instance is to look at your calendar, look at my calendar, figure out when we are available, when we are not available. After that, probably send you a message saying, hey, Udbhav's going to be in town. These are the times you can meet for coffee. It looks like you like the cappuccino in this place. Do you want to meet him? You'll probably click on yes. And then it'll let me know she is available. Here's when she should meet for coffee. Why don't you click, do you want to meet her on this date? And then when I click on yes, it ends up being scheduled, right? Like that's a loop of a very simple, seemingly very convenient thing that AI and AI agents specifically are already being advertised as things that we will start using in the future.
All this consent, right? We're saying it's okay. My bot would have to, I would have to say, yes, I want Ubdav's bot to look into my stuff, right? Okay.
Exactly, right? What will have to happen is that AI agent will have to have access at a minimum to your messaging app, so it can get in touch with me on your behalf, to my email so that it can email me, to my calendar so that it can see when I am available and not available, hopefully without knowing what I'm doing at those times. And also your device, in order to be able to figure out something like which kind of cappuccino you like, because it's very unlikely that that's something that you would have like pre-prompted into the system before it asks you a couple of times, and then after that it remembers that information. But when it remembers that information, what it becomes is a honeypot about some of the most sensitive pieces of information in your life: where you live, when you're free, what your preferences are, and lots of other information that today, even in this massive age of, like surveillance capitalism, where most of the valuable companies in the world are deriving their value from exploiting consumer data, for an application like Signal, that means when we say that only you and I can read the messages we are sending each other, there's now a third party in that dynamic. And the third party in that dynamic is whichever AI agent you decide to use. You could use, of course, the one that your operating system provides, like Apple or Microsoft, but anyone else too. And For us, that means that if users are able to let very powerful systems access their most intimate information, the threshold at which they need to be able to allow people to do so is really, really high. It shouldn't be a when you're setting up a new computer, it asks you for 5 permissions and then asks you one time every time you ask it to do something new. And then after that, you don't have to care about it. And that is a very, very scary situation, which we've already also started seeing in the real world. And there's an example around Microsoft Recall, a pretty scary piece of functionality that Microsoft first announced last year and then just has started rolling out this year.
What is Microsoft Recall?
Yeah, what it does is it takes a screenshot of your screen every 3 to 5 seconds, stores it on your computer, and then on your device, without sharing it on the internet, trains a model to be able to answer questions like, when was the last time that I was chatting with Udbhav? So what it would do is scan those images, and in those images, it would know that Udbhav appeared on your screen as a name on top, say in the Signal application, on this day. When the feature was first announced, it got so much pushback that Microsoft had to spend a year trying to improve the feature before rolling it out. And even today, it is not something that is enabled by default, which means even if you go to a store, buy a new Windows laptop that supports the features, and you turn it on, it will ask you, do you want to enable Microsoft Recall? But after you click on yes and hopefully read some of the conditions that come up when you do that, that's all. It doesn't tell people that Signal seems like a sensitive application. Are you sure you want to share that information with Microsoft Recall? And the only kinds of applications where it is currently programmed to not take screenshots are private browsing modes in browsers. Because that the browser industry managed to speak and convince Microsoft that it is a valid way to protect privacy, but there's nothing for messaging apps, there's nothing for email apps, and there's no protection for the like financial information, health information. There's so much that people have on their computers, and it simply isn't developed to the extent that it should. So what Signal did was we blocked the feature. So today, if you run Signal on a Windows 11 device and install it today, it will actually, and if you try to take a screenshot, all you will get is a blank screen. And that's just a full loop of both the problem that we are seeing, but also what are the ways in which we're seeing it in the world today, and we're trying to push back against it as well.
It's a really helpful anecdote. Terrifying, honestly. I can't imagine, but it's just your computer screen is just, there are screenshots of that are being collected. As I look across the world, just applications being built, surfaces just emerging all over the place, we're tapping away neural networks to come. But the amount of data, again, that we're just emanating, but sort of passively and proactively, all of that is just going to be able to be accessed in some way. Yes, this is existential, right? But I imagine then for your business, okay, and you're thinking about your roadmap for the next 5 years, 3 years, 5 years, is, if you can see out that far, you can play whack-a-mole against all of these different services that that Signal does not control. It's not mission aligned in terms of integrity and how it's built, what it's doing for consumers. And so how, for your company, how are you thinking about what the future of privacy actually means for consumers in this environment? Is it even possible?
I would definitely say that it is possible. As you can imagine, the capability that I've described to you around Microsoft Recall is a very intuitive capability to explain to both a person sitting at home and using the browser just to see where they need to go on a holiday next, as well as a government individual having very sensitive discussions about which diplomat should be posted where, right? Like, it's equally risky to the both of them in the context in which they're using it. And which is why what we think really, really needs to happen is a way for applications to be able to communicate with operating systems and tell them, I'm private. I don't want these features to be able to touch my application and the data that it has. And if the operating system wants to override it, then it explicitly needs to ask the user, are you sure you want to be able to do this? To be clear, if a user wants to use AI with Signal on an operating system, they should have the freedom and the choice to do so. But they should have the freedom and the choice after they've been informed of all the consequences, after they've been shown what could go wrong, what could go right, and what are the ways in which they can protect themselves. And it will actually be really, really easy for an operating system to do this. And the remediation is actually pretty simple. There are far harder problems both in AI and in privacy that deserve a lot more attention than people mistakenly taking screenshots, of your intimate conversations with someone. And we should probably treat it that way.
Of course. I mean, so, I mean, I've heard this so many. It's just a simple line of code. You see the the technical fix, right? But what you're talking about, the incentivization structure of surveillance capitalism, of data capitalism, which is really the world that we live in now and we've been living in. The incentive structure would have to change for that to be true, and for any of these companies, these private companies, to actually have to meet any kind of regulatory requirement, of which we really don't have any.
Signal is a nonprofit. And why, as a nonprofit, a lot of the incentives that exist in the ecosystem around what we need to do, how many users we need to have, how much data we need to collect, what monetization looks like, the kinds of partnerships we make, are all things that don't necessarily have the same hold on us as they might to a public company. Because a public company has a share price to defend. And if Wall Street doesn't end up liking something that the company is doing, there can be very real consequences to deciding to be private. Because that would mean that you will no longer make enough money, therefore your shares are less valuable, and therefore you may not have money to do the privacy preserving thing you want to do because people just thought that privacy is not as profitable as exploiting your data.
How many people are using Signal? I just if you could give me a rough estimate of your global user base.
Of course, usually when you ask a question like how many users do you have to an organization, they often have vast amounts of data about very minute details as to how people are using their application, which button gets clicked the most, how many people delete messages every day. A lot of this is information we simply do not collect. Because the truth of the matter is, every time this information is collected, it actually creates another data point about that individual and gets into the details of how they may be using the service that may seem absolutely harmless now, but in the future, when combined with two other pieces of facts of information, could actually end up being quite damaging to that individual and their privacy. Having said that, Signal has been downloaded hundreds of millions of times around the world. It's a product where we don't actually share our user numbers, especially broken down at a country level, because sometimes it can also pose risks to people who use the application, and sometimes can also help governments block the application or try to block it again after they may have blocked it one time, but Signal says, hey, actually there are still 300 people or 300,000 people in this country still using the application, and that makes them investigate it more. But it has been downloaded hundreds of millions of times, and we've seen a radical jump in our popularity over the last couple of years.
Well, we should talk about that radical jump in popularity. I think it's very interesting that you're like, I can't answer this question completely because we don't collect all of this data. Great way to respond. I think that these platforms actually have more data than we have on ourselves about our own health records and such. It's wild, the vast amounts of data that we're just inputting all day long. And so you're saying we're not collecting that, and we know how many times the app was downloaded, basically. You're not looking at monthly active users that are coming back. You don't know when they're coming back, is my assumption. Okay.
Yes, that is true. There is information that we have at a global scale, like broader trends and aggregates about how the application is being used. So, for example, how many connections are being successful so that we can figure out how many governments are blocking Signal. What are the ways in which Signal is also being blocked as well? But as you can imagine, sharing that information publicly could be used to extrapolate the number of users that we have, but would also end up creating information that then sometimes authoritarian regimes can use to further restrict the application as well.
Our conversation keeps coming back to the fundamentals of privacy and this mission that you seem to have culturally. Signal's been around for a while. As a journalist and in many newsrooms, was used in very early days for tips, and end-to-end encryption is those are the words we heard, and we thought this is safe and people can send us information. And but it's still being used in many newsrooms. I'm seeing things about younger people. One of our production coordinator was saying that within her own group chat, Signal is becoming something. I'm just listen. I binged this new Netflix show over the weekend. I'm not embarrassed about it. The Hunting Wives. Anyway, Signal was a main character in it, and I was like, interesting in the communication. And like, let's not forget Signalgate. I mean, there's so many things that we can't forget about the beginning of this year and the administration, but Signalgate. So Signal has no contract with our government, but is a platform that's being used. And as I understand it, out of necessity, because some of the ways that the government are actually talking to each other are perhaps not even as secure as your platform. Am I, yeah, correct the record and tell us what actually happened. Why is was Signalgate a thing?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I'm very happy to give the answer that I think as much applies to Signalgate as the newsrooms that you had mentioned earlier, as it does to lawyers, as it does to human rights defenders in many countries as well. When you perform communications, you want to leave as few traces as possible in the ecosystem that can then be used to track and trace either you or other participants in that conversation. And the best form of privacy and the best form of data protection is simply not collecting the data at all in the first place, rather than attempting to comply with the privacy law that makes you go through 10 steps before you have to share the information. But the reality is, if organizations and governments want information, then they can access it. And it's not even always governments. There have been, I think, countless instances of malicious actors breaking into companies and stealing communication, breaking into lots of sensitive places and stealing communication and then making it generally available. We've even seen multi-billion-dollar companies like Sony go through some very well-documented hacks where movie scripts to conversations that employees had about their bosses and everything in between ended up being released onto the internet. And it's that trust, the fact that with Signal, a lot of that information is not even being collected in the first place and not being stored somewhere else, that makes all of them turn to the application.
Do you have any enterprise layer that you're using for these? You do?
No, we don't have any enterprise layers, and we very specifically have decided to focus on being a consumer application and providing the expectations that the average user has about a messenger. Enterprise applications, more often than not, almost always require greater data retention than what we would be comfortable with as an organization. Imagine the Ford Motor Company comes to Signal and says, we want to use Signal for every single employee at Ford, but actually we also need you to keep a copy for every conversation that gets marked as a legal hold conversation so that we can use it for a case later. That's obviously something that can happen, and there are legitimate reasons for which it should happen as well. But Signal as an application does not want to be an organization that provides those capabilities in the first place. If you really have to use a communication that allows you to place a hold and archive messages and access them again, there are many players in the market space that you can use to provide that archiving functionality. But if you want privacy and the idea that no one apart from the two individuals or multiple individuals having the conversation can access it, then you turn to Signal.
One more big question here, and then I've got some rapid fire stuff for us. It was, over the weekend, I read this piece about Switzerland, the country. They have built their own AI locally somewhere. They're like, we're getting this thing off the internet. All right. We're building it with the stuff that we think should go in it. And this is going to be for public good, which that's fascinating. And then you've got Sweden, who a couple of weeks ago said, wait a second, citizens have the right to their digital existence. They're setting precedent. I mean, this is European countries thinking way ahead. And over here where I sit now in the, United States of America, we have a bunch of private AI companies hiring $100 million, geniuses to build that with a completely different mission than what you're talking about. So should we look to these other countries for inspiration? How do you think about this? How does Signal think about this in working to set policy and part of what you're doing here? Yeah, I'd love to anything and everything under the sun around that.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right that there are different regulatory standards all over the world. And in some places, people have a stronger right to privacy than they have it in other places. And that's because governments have passed certain laws. But even private companies are not immune to people being creeped out. I promise you, the day in which there's a scandal where some mayor in some town has to leave his post because Microsoft Recall took a bunch of photos of something that they are not really supposed to, that is maybe the first instance when it becomes public. But these are things that very viscerally impact people on a day-to-day basis if they start going wrong in the way that we are currently discussing them. And the reality is today we are very much on a trajectory where that will start happening. And when the bad stuff starts happening, it's actually these very same companies that will not want to be in the news for bad reasons, because people will always ask, why did this happen? And you can't really tell when you're in the middle of a national scandal, actually this user should have just gone into the settings here and pressed this one button and then it would not have happened. That's not a solution to the problem, right? So I think we're also increasingly in a world even where laws and regulations don't necessarily protect you. The public pressure and the impression of the impact your technology is having on the lives of people is certainly deeply consequential to the price of your share. And that bad news ends up impacting that. And I think, therefore, public awareness of the fact that this is possible, of the ways in which you can protect yourself, and of the ways in which you speak to industry and government in the ways that you can as a consumer, either while voting with your wallet or campaigning for people who you think espouse the political views that you do and therefore should pass privacy legislation that will protect consumers, are all ways in which I think this is a future that, while their financial structures won't currently lead to it happening, the consequences are so severe that as long as people are prepared for them as they start happening in the world around them, the fixes will actually come pretty quickly too.
I mean, we talked a little bit about, okay, how are you going to think about privacy in a world that's just being built by, honestly, robots replace? But in your utopian, we get it right scenario, if your roadmap is, executed to mission, and instead of what could go wrong, what could go right, how do you see that? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we definitely see a world in which the kinds of promises that Signal makes to its users are going to become only more important every single passing day than the previous day. It's become pretty clear that it's not like lesser of the world will be online, lesser of the world will not use the internet, lesser of the world will not communicate with each other digitally. There's very much a world in which end-to-end encryption ends up becoming the norm. And that for us is definitely a very good thing, because while Signal is a provider of the messaging application, I also mentioned earlier how we build the Signal protocol. And the Signal protocol is the technological standard by which many other applications also do end-to-end encryption. So a world in which more end-to-end encryption takes place is better for Signal, both as a nonprofit and as a consumer application, and with regard to fulfilling its mission. And I think we are definitely moving in that direction. I don't think that journey is going to be a very smooth one, largely because in that journey, one is going to be contesting against very, very powerful economic interests, right? Like if you make $250 billion a year from targeting people on the basis of their information, you don't want that to become 200. And if you have, immense lobbying teams, immense communications teams, and very smart engineers all working to keep trying to do that while also invading your privacy, but saying you're not invading your privacy, I imagine that they will be successful in some ways and not successful in others. But at Signal, we think that the strongest way in which we show up in the world is actually not my work or my colleagues' work in comms or my colleagues' work in community or technical engagement. It's actually in changing what societal expectations are for what encryption and what privacy should actually mean in the modern world. So 12 years ago, if you would have been having this conversation with me, I think I would have told you, we really hope to see a world in which billions of people use encryption. Today, easily over 4.5 to 5 billion people on the internet use encryption every day. At least 3.5 billion people of them use end-to-end encryption. So encryption is actually one of the very few remarkable success stories of the internet. So we want to remain focused on that and continue building a product that will set the bar for the rest of the industry.
Lastly, one question. Just tell us, how are you using AI personally? I mean, you're a person that thinks about privacy, you think about consumer behavior, you're building for a new future of AI. What are you how are you using it?
Absolutely. I mean, I have like a pretty strong like hobbyist interest in technology. So while by no means I'm not an engineer, I'm not like, a software developer who builds their own AI models, but I am someone who, whenever information does come out about, say, a new model release or a new way of being able to run AI on your device, not on the internet, sometimes even being able to run an AI for your home, which is running on a small device like a Raspberry Pi, which is just like a mini server that can answer the questions that people at home are asking it to, but that information is not going anywhere. So I'm a person who loves tinkering with those, which is like trying to figure out what are the ways in which these systems actually work, and also what are their limitations, right? To be clear, the thing that runs at home on a Raspberry Pi is not something that can compete with ChatGPT. So I think like You can get one for $25 now. And you can just set it up at home, plug it into your router, and you can actually run a version of a model on that. You spend a little more, you'll get even more powerful models that can run at home, right? And the reason I do a lot of these things is to figure out how many of the privacy properties that we spoke about of AI, like in this conversation, are inherent to the technology. And then what are the ones that are actually designed to support the organizations that are building this technology? Like, does it really need to run on the cloud? Does it really need $100 billion of energy over the next 5 years? Or is it possible for these things to happen in much easier ways? Maybe there's lesser money in it, but maybe it's much better for people in the environment if they are.
Amazing. Okay. Raspberry Pi away. It's really just a privilege to have you on here and explain it. This has been fantastic. I just thank you again for your time. It was amazing to have you on the Intersect. And yeah, I'll see you on Signal. Okay, guys, other big things to know in AI and tech this week. And we touched on it a bit earlier, but Switzerland's ethical GPT-4 rival. The country of Switzerland is launching a publicly built GPT-4 style large language model this summer. It's an open source, transparent alternative to commercial AI. Very interesting. No dependencies on big tech infrastructure. And it's also built on carbon neutral supercomputers powered by Swiss Alps hydropower. It positions itself as a blueprint for ethical, sustainable AI owned by the public. It's really a first of a kind project, and it's interesting. And honestly, our tech companies and governments should be watching and paying attention to this. Europe is ahead on privacy. This is like a GDPR, privacy first approach. Very, very, very interesting. Watching that one. Secondly, this rise of AI-powered education. We've been talking about AI in education, what that means. The Alpha School is a private AI-first school founded in Austin, and it's expanding this fall. Students spend, get this, just 2 hours a day on core academics using AI-powered learning apps. So they're in front of a screen with a personalized AI for 2 hours. And then the rest of the school day is focused on project-based, life skill-oriented learning. The school is co-founded by Mackenzie Price. She's a Stanford psych grad and influencer, and she promotes her 2-hour learning as this model for modern education. And the school claims that students learn 2 to 6 times faster than traditional classrooms. And, critics are questioning the lack of independent validation. This is very early. We haven't seen anything like this before. I think the jury is out, but it's very interesting. And it's a radical concept, but it's not that radical given all the things that we're talking about. So we'll be paying attention to this one. And expansion's underway to more than a dozen cities, including New York and Orlando. Lastly, there's been a data breach at the T app, which is raising some pretty urgent privacy concerns. T is this very fast-growing dating app where women can share information about men they might date. It's been marketed as a way to flag dangerous behavior. I mean, this sounds like a good idea, right? And, identities have to be verified. It gained major attention last week after surging to 2 million plus users, went to the top of the App Store. And then last week, the company announced a major data breach. Over 70,000 images were leaked, including selfies, government IDs. Not good. This data was originally stored to prevent harassment, and now it's out there, and that's the opposite. So it unfortunately reads as a cautionary tale about very well-intentioned digital protection whose data wasn't private. Maybe T should call Udbhav. All right, that's it for this week. Thanks for sticking around. And if you liked our show, please hit follow wherever you are, and we'll see you next week on The Intersect.